just to say welcome to you guys who will be working through this unit. I know that this can be seen as a difficult subject, a difficult topic, and I'm very thankful that we have Akasha who will be sharing with us from her experience as an autistic lady who is also a trans woman. So I'm going to be asking Akasha some questions, and Akasha is going to hopefully reply just for some short, to the point, points for discussion that will contribute to your course. The kind of questions Akasha will be talking about are things like, when were you diagnosed as an autistic person? Did your diagnosis impact your family life? And how, when did you know you were living with gender dysphoria? And Akasha might tell you a little bit about that. Once you knew, did it take you long to decide what you thought you needed to do about this, if anything? What else? After you recognised that you were living with gender dysphoria and you were also on the autism spectrum, were you able to separate the things that you now think belong to being autistic compared to things that you could say, no, that was definitely a gender issue? I'm also an autistic adult and I lived with gender dysphoria for many years, and I know that for me, once I transitioned into the man I am and who's person I've always been but was kind of hidden up, I was able to separate some of the sensory stuff that I was living with and work out, well, that was actually autism, but that was definitely due to gender dysphoria. So Akash may have some of those similar experiences. Find out soon. Do you think being an older autistic is helpful? So, for example, if we've got the opportunity to do something about what we know, that we are living with gender variance, would we have taken that opportunity as a younger person? Are there regrets? Are there things that we feel we've missed out on? I know, again, for me, some of the social stuff that boys have growing up that I certainly missed out on because I was socialised as a female. I certainly rebelled against that, but it still happened for me. I can get into times where I regret, I miss, or I don't feel I know quite what to do in certain situations. So maybe Akash has some of those experiences too. Anyway, enough from me. Akash is going to talk to you too. Thank you. Okay, well, thanks Akash for joining us. Tell us about when you were diagnosed as being on the autistic spectrum.
Well, I actually had brain surgery in '89. Had a left temporal lobectomy and some cancer removed, so I was in rehab a lot, and I was becoming very non-verbal in hospital, and they didn't have the slightest idea what it was. So I ended up in the Austin Hospital, and I had a neurologist and neurosurgeon there who diagnosed me as having autistic symptoms. And it wasn't until I found out in 2000 is that I had autism, and I had, well, what was then Asperger's. And I went, oh, is that right? And that was a neurologist who said, well, it's been in your files here for years. All these other neurologists have diagnosed you with this afterwards, and they just never told you.
The diagnosis, when you actually integrated that information into your own psyche, did that impact on your family life?
I was living with people that really didn't understand very much, so I had to read a lot of by myself and had to try and understand it, and it clicked. It made a lot of sense upon how I saw the world, what I didn't understand. The main thing that I got to understand was my high sensitivity, why my ears were higher frequencies than most people, why my eyes were oversensitive.
So you didn't feel supported by family?
No,
Okay.
actually, I didn't. And when I had meltdowns because of the people I was living with, I hid it a lot.
Yeah.
And I had to sort of see, well, this is a part of my neurological problem. That was my excuse rather than people understanding what autism was.
And when did you actually come to understand you were living with what we call gender dysphoria, where you felt you had physically been named or assigned one gender and were becoming aware that that wasn't who you were?
I've just, in the last few years, I've finished the Child Sexual Abuse Royal Commission because I was abused as a child from a minister, from a priest. But it changed the way I saw myself in late primary school in a place called Tangambalanga. As my previous gender, I was playing netball in grade 4, 5 and 6. And in the early 80s, that just didn't happen for that gender. And it was a girls' team, and girls did this and boys did that. I played netball for 3 years. And that is how I saw myself, and I got a lot of bullying from that.
Okay, so right back, that's going quite
Oh
a
yeah,
ways
early
back,
times.
Yeah, okay. Once you knew as an adult that this is what was happening for you, what did you perceive yourself doing about it, if anything?
I got divorced, and I had a way of looking a little bit different at life, and I had to relook at myself of what was making me so incredibly unhappy. I knew what transgender was because I studied it in early high school. I knew what intersex was and everything, believe it or not. One day with a person I was living with, I just bawled my eyes out and I said, I'm a woman, I'm a girl. That relationship, which wasn't very much, broke up very quickly afterwards. And unfortunately, I had a Molotov cocktail thrown on my door and I had to move to Melbourne very quickly. I lost my job. I lost a lot of things in the country town. It didn't go down too well.
So did you then decide, okay, from now on, this is how I will dress, this is what I will, how I will talk, how I will present? Did you see or go to visit a psychiatrist? What did you do?
All of the information I had was all on the internet. I had magazines that I used to buy from Sydney because I was in Albury. I had a GP in Albury and I was sort of just slowly changing what I was wearing. And I went and asked this GP and he just gave me this absolute blank look about you or what? Now, in this day, there wasn't even transgender rights in Victoria. They were still coming up. Albury-Wodonga still had a lot of even homophobia there. So I took the big trip to the city and stayed at a friend's house, and the next day I went and saw this doctor and he started me off on hormones. But what was amazing is this little tiny, tiny tablet of Diane. It was so small, like the morning after pill, and I still remember sitting down with a glass of water and taking that one tablet. And it made me feel, now you can actually have a lot of that angst that you've had and that huge weight that you've had on your shoulders for so long can be helped. And it wasn't that simple.
Yeah, no.
I wish it was, but it wasn't.
Were you able to separate, or did you think you needed to separate, this is autism stuff, this is gender stuff, this is sensory, this is... Did you do that kind of thing, or it didn't actually occur to you?
I think I've only figured that out in the last bunch of years.
Yeah.
Really figured out, because I was on hormones for living as a woman from 98 to about 2002, and I was told by a person I was working with, if you want work here, we can't employ you as transgender, full stop. Not in this industry. Also the people that I was living with, it was, well, if you're going to live here, you have to live as what you were born as, otherwise go away. So miraculously one night, it was amazing that the old me came back, and I gave up the hormones cold turkey and my hair fell out.
Oh, golly.
And to be honest, inside of me from that time was extremely unhappy. It was very unhappy, and I went into like a pseudo role or a pseudo mode of who I was. Now, today I'd like to bring up a really interesting subject. I've been annoying the people at Grit for this for a while. Disability, sexuality, gender blenders, Stone Age cronies. Let's try and put this down to one subject. Funny enough, years and years and years ago, I actually was transgender for a while, and I actually ended up stopped being transgender because of society, culture, reasons, and all the rest of it. And I think that I got more and more depressed, and I got a lot higher anxiety, and I was a lot more angry, and I was a lot more unhappy. So it was around about 2.5 years ago, I went back to the doctor and checked out my hormones. Inside of me has, besides my angst, which has been there for so many years, this has been the other balance, which has given me more positive balance on the other side of who I really am.
For people who might say gender variance, gender dysphoria, gender issues are more common amongst the autistic population, that's one school of thought, and there is some research to support that. There's another school of thought that says many people who get a diagnosis of gender dysphoria and start to change their gender into who they know they are, lose their diagnosis of autism, that actually autism was a misdiagnosis in the first place. What would you say to that?
Well, my autism hasn't changed at all. To be honest, I think a lot of my senses I have meltdowns a lot more because of a lot to do with my work and things such as that. We question, and when we've matured ourselves or are maturing, we question the norm because we don't necessarily understand the norm. And I think it's because we question gender.
So you would see gender as one thing and autism as another, but possibly the reason for there being more of us as autistic people living with gender variance is that, as you said, I liked what you said a moment ago about that we're just not so stuck in that binary world. We're more open, we're more honest, perhaps more in touch with who we are, and not so socially driven by the sort of peer pressures that are out there to conform. We're much more likely
Because
to
we don't
be who we
necessarily
are.
fit.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah.
like the massive webpage Wrong Planet.
Because you're an older adult, you're not in your 20s, have you regrets that it took a long time to come to terms with who you are? Do you feel like you've missed things, or were you able to just incorporate those things and accept that this is who I am, etc.? What would your answer be to that?
I think my abuse was one of my largest delays in my life and has caused, being able to deal with that 37 years later is one of my biggest problems. If I dealt with that, I was strong enough to deal with it a long time ago, I think it would have been better. It makes you stronger though, and the thing that I have now is I believe I've earned time. My journey with being transgender is the journey itself. It's not the surgery and things like that. If they are the main perspective, a lot of people are going to be very, very, very disappointed. You've got to find out in your soul who you are. When I was in my late 20s and early 30s, I don't think that I was ready for that as far as you throw it. And I think that that was my biggest problem, is that I thought hormones and going for gender rights was the ideal part of what a woman was. It was all great. Once you have surgery, everything was wang dang, there it was. It's not like that. So I'm finding out now it's a longer phase. I have an amazing partner who challenges me about what gender is, challenges me on my past, and who loves me as a woman